The first black Minnesotan was Pierre Bonga and his son, George, who was born outside of Duluth in 1802. The next 100 years would see a migration of blacks, freed, enslaved populations reach Minnesota, including a significant population of slaves owned by officers stationed at Fort Snelling. Most notable among them was Dred Scott and his wife Harriet Robinson Scott. Freed blacks and fugitive slaves continued to migrate to Minnesota, where they engaged the attention of territorial legislatures. Some legislatures feared that the Mississippi River was becoming a conduit for those fleeing from the South, and that blacks were becoming burdensome competition to the unskilled white population. Settlement communities quickly evolved into vibrant black social and economic enclaves throughout the state as children of black homesteaders began to come of age. By the turn of the century, the black population had grown sixfold. By 1910, a majority were employed as waiters and porters. These jobs lay the groundwork for neighborhoods that attracted the skilled black tradesmen, the stonecutters, the bricklayers, and the masons. The Appeal, a black newspaper of the time, reported on August 24, 1901, that St. Paul had the largest percentage of black homeowners than any other city in the United States. Even in the best of times, during the history of black migrations to Minnesota, there would be the constant, painful reminder of the tenuous hold on citizenship and human rights and dignity. On June 15, 1920, when 3 black circus workers were attacked and lynched by a mob in Duluth, Minnesota, rumors had circulated that 6 African Americans had raped and robbed a white teenage girl. A physician's examination subsequently found no evidence of a rape or assault. The killing shocked the country, particularly for their occurrence in the northern United States, although 4 years earlier, lynchings had occurred in Minnesota.
Our original roots seem to be in a place called Abbeville, South Carolina, and we are now able to go back to 1798. And the other roots would be in Memphisboro, Tennessee, and we're basically able to go back to probably 1885. My grandfathers, I'm very proud of their lineage and legacy. My grandfather on my father's side, C.M. Edwards, was a railroad man, worked for the Pullman Company for 44 years. Later worked for the Radisson Hotel in Kansas City. His home base was Kansas City, Missouri. Actually waited his last banquet at the Radisson Muehlbach in Kansas City when he was 91 years old.
Tell us the short
version. Well, actually, my family, on my mother's side of the family, came to Minnesota before Minnesota was a state. My great-grandfather, I think it is, or great-grandfather, came here in 1850 as a veterinary tech at Fort Snelling. And so we have a long history. My father came here in the 1950s fighting, Golden Gloves. Met my mom, a woman with skinny legs and anyway. Met my mom and I was born.
My grandfather was the first freeborn in that side of the family. And his master was a Scottish man who owned a lot of land and a lot of slaves near Charlottesville. And it was the McKee family. He took that name with him, fought in the Spanish-American War. After that conflict, was stationed in Mandan, North Dakota. He migrated back to Chicago, where he had gone before the Spanish-American War. After his discharge, opened up a small business stoking furnaces on Rush Street. It was at that time he met a young German woman and married her and moved to South Minneapolis right around the turn of the 20th century.
The African American community in St. Paul was scattered around St. Paul. In the 1920s, two churches opened up over here in what we call the Rondo District. One was the Pilgrim Baptist Church, and the other one was St. James A&M Church. And when they moved into what was the heart of the Rondo community, other people would start to come. What they found when they moved into the Rondo neighborhood was a mixed community of the Jewish people, whites. Some whites were still living there, and the blacks started moving in and buying homes and congregating around the main thoroughfare of Rondo Avenue, which was about a 3-mile stretch from one end, from the eastern tip to the western tip at Lexington, and then 2 blocks or so on each side of Rondo.
Frederick McGee was the first black professional, the first black attorney in Minnesota. He was in the beginning of Rondo. McGee was a giant for many. He is the George Washington of the Minnesota black history. He was the first black lawyer to try a capital case, the first to take a case to the state Supreme Court, and the founder of St. Peter Claver Church. McGee, along with W.E.B. Du Bois and others, founded the Niagara Movement. The creation of what later became the NAACP has roots in St. Paul.
My grandmother and my great aunts and uncle all grew up on this farm in Rochester. And from there, my grandmother went to a boarding school and then settled in the old Rondo neighborhood, became a member of Pilgrim Baptist Church, met my grandfather, who was from Arkansas, and settled there in this relatively stable African American community. This was a community that was really defined by all these folks that worked in these service professions. My grandfather was a sleeping car porter.
I would just say for me, everything that I saw in my own house, in the house of my grandparents, and in the surrounding community reinforced the idea that we are a community and we're stronger when we work together. One of my fondest memories as a young girl was actually coming to Hallie Q. Brown. Hallie Q. Brown was actually near my grandparents' house, so when I would come to Hallie Q. Brown, I would always get to go to my grandparents' house too, because it's like just 2 blocks away. But even when I went to Hallie Q. Brown, the people that were our instructors at Hallie Q. Brown were the people that lived in our neighborhood.
My dad grew up on Old Rondo. My great-grandfather, Mim Carter, taught all the story's sake, could play all the instruments and taught the neighborhood band. So they would parade Mim Carter's musical strings, or the jazz band and the musical strings up and down the streets of Old Rondo. My grandfather's one of the kind of historic jazz artists of the Twin Cities area. Used to play on my dad's proms and has played with Miles and Dizzy and you name them, all these guys when they come through town. My grandfather would be playing with them. So my dad grew up on Rondo, and you know, when I was growing up, I would always hear the stories of Old Rondo and how Old Rondo got torn up. My father would be on 94 passing it right under like Dale, and my dad would always go, you're in my bedroom now. And tells the story of, you know, when the families were removed. My grandfather owned about a little over 6 commercial properties on University Avenue, and you know, including or on Rondo Avenue, sorry, and including the house that they lived in. You know, my father tells this story about after they were forced out of their house, watching the St. Paul Fire Department burn down this house they had just been forced out of. And it like the fire department is the people we pay to protect us from fire. Right. Watching them like burn down your house, your bedroom. I mean,
and along Rondo Avenue, your traditional little village shops show up, small neighborhood shops, butcher shops, grocery stores, tailors, beauty shops and barber shops, shoe shine parlors, car repair, and then some social organizations began to form along Rondo, and then inevitably you would have your adult recreational spots. Around the height of the Rondo, that when I look at it, the very, very acme of Rondo's, African American businesses, shops, predominantly occurred right around the 1930s into the 40s before the war. There was a place called the Welcome Hall in Rondo, which was basically that's what it was. It was more or less like an unofficial social agency that served multiple purposes for the African American community.
It's a very rich experience, and after so many years, I can still see myself as a young girl sitting in the rooms or in the kitchen, of Hallie Q. Brown making cookies with Mrs. Burns or, somebody else, just as if it was yesterday. That's how, indelible those memories are in my mind.
And it's interesting when you think of Minnesota as the North Star state, right? That really is how we are here, whether it's the folks who have come from Africa in the last 20 years or so fleeing Civil War, or the folks who was trying to get out of the Deep South. They're trying to come. My church I grew up in, Pilgrim Baptist Church, was founded by a group of former slaves who literally came up the Mississippi River on a raft.
It's one of the things I talk about, especially during Black History Month. I mean, one of the most frustrating things once you become socially conscious is that Black history gets relegated to this piece that on February 1st, you dust off these books that you've had in the closet someplace and bring them out, and for 28 days, people talk about, oh, here's what happened, and here's the people you need to know, and then teachers or lecturers just put them back on the shelf and forget about that. And one of the things that's really important for people to understand is that Black history is not Black history. It doesn't really exist. It came about because we needed to bring forth this idea that people were glossing over or hiding away, and it's actually American history. It's actually world history. It's our history. When the Civil Rights Movement happened, it wasn't just for Black people. It wasn't like a special set aside, and there were plenty of white people, there were plenty of Latinos, there were plenty of other people from different races who came together and saw this as something really key. But when you start talking about, who invented the stoplight or who did, first open heart surgery, it wasn't just like we get a special coupon and we get to use stoplights or drive around DC. It's something that affects everybody. It's part of everybody. And the only way to really move us past that is to get people to understand just how much of this stuff has not been told to them.
The Phyllis Wheatley House was affectionately known as the greatest settlement house in the United States for Negroes. The Wheatley House offered classes not only in citizenship and English, but in recreation, boxing, music, drama, and Black history. It was the hotel for out-of-town visitors in a time when hotels did not accommodate Black guests. Langston Hughes, Marian Anderson, and other visiting artists all stayed in the Wheatley. As a matter of fact, many of the early people that went to the University of Minnesota stayed in the Phyllis Wheatley, dormed in the Phyllis Wheatley. In his autobiography, Harry Davis recalled that Miss Brown built a center that would train young Black people for leadership in the community, for college and professional positions. Harry Davis himself was the first African American to chair the Minneapolis Public School Board, the first African American to run for the office of mayor, with a major party backing in 1971. This building that was located on Aldridge and 8th Avenue is an institution in the African American community. I have never met a Black person that grew up in the Sumner housing projects, my mother included, who does not have tears in their eyes when they talk about the solid foundation that they received in that settlement house.
I've had the great fortune, is how I describe it, to be engaged in activities, events, history of us as a people. So yes, I had an opportunity to be a part of the team of Minnesotans that went to Washington for the March on Washington. I'd had and as a result of that, have had a chance to hear Dr. King's message, as well as the message of John Lewis and others who spoke that day. It also gave us, those of us in that 250 plus thousand people, an opportunity to see the possibility of this large group of people expressing in some unison a concern for justice in the fields that mean so much to us. Education for our children and housing opportunities and jobs and health, all the things that we are still marching about.
This was during the 60s, you know what was going on across the country during the 60s. And youth was just kind of running wild out there. Didn't have a lot of direction, and of course, everywhere the concern was, you got no place to go, nothing to do, blah, 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 blah. And so a fellow named Bill Wilson and Ronald Edwards, my brother Jackie, and myself founded the Inner City Youth League. I think was tapped for that because somehow a grant or some money had come through, and what are we going to do about the youth? And the youth is running out there, and the police brutality, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, here's me. I would just walk down the street, and my brother was even more magnetic with that than I was, but and we would just do stuff, and kids would look at that and want to be a part of it.
And I always give this example because I was very much of an activist by the 1960s. I think you saw the surprise and shock, how stunned the civil rights leadership of the South was when Dr. Martin Luther King came north and attempted to do housing integration in Chicago, in Marquette Park. Yeah. And that became the realization that segregation, racism, bigotry, and etc. were more entrenched than they could have ever imagined. Yeah. And so for those that have resided in the North for an extended period of time, particularly in a state such as Minnesota that is still primarily 75% white, that you're more exposed, if you will, to the very subtle kinds of racism that goes on.
It's the days of so-called civil unrest was an era in which we came into maturity as young adults. You know, some people will call them riots. I thought of them and was taught that they were really acts of insurrection. It was black people protesting against the kind of human violation of our human rights, right, and bigotry and segregation in America that was unjust. And it was at the time of Martin and Malcolm and all of those people who inspired a whole generation of people like myself at that time. I came to Minnesota because I heard it was a great place for black people. And I found out when I first got here that it wasn't so great.
When people say, well, how do you gonna get rid of it? You just do what Douglas said. Freddie Douglass, you struggle. That's why you create new things through struggle. We know that the basic law of nature is contradiction. What is going to contradict this? We have to create something to contradict it. It's just like, on a minor scale, the civil rights movement had to emerge to contest, a big aspect of racism. That was formal, legal segregation. took a long time to get to the point where people said, no, exclamation point, I'm not putting up with this anymore. You know? And like I said, there were many, many moving parts in this story.
This is where I'm born and raised, and I'm seeing things happening that shouldn't be happening. So we did a lot of stuff. There's a document called On the Edge. Somehow people need to see that again. It was shown prime time on a Sunday. Reporters came, what's going to be the long hot summer? We said, what you talking about, long hot summer? Well, if you're talking about burning up something, we know the temperature's going to be high. What are you talking about? That's how we used to play them off. But Kwame McDonald and myself invited the reporters to come to the community and spend the summer with us. Now, and don't just come running in here with some cameras. Come in here, bring your bedroll, and we'll let you sleep in our basement so that you can document everything that these kids do, that they tell you that they want.
First of all, we had to fight for jobs. There just wasn't any jobs. We had to fight the post office. We had to fight Honeywell. We had to fight the bus company, the cab company. Right. We had to fight the school system. We had to fight the Hennepin County Hospital. I mean, our doctors and nurses weren't able to work in medicine until the Jews built a hospital over on Chicago Avenue called Mount Sinai. We led all those fights. We won all those fights. Even Donaldson's and Dayton's wouldn't hire us. You know what I mean? Everywhere we went as young people, we had to champion the lead of the fight to make a difference in our lives. And they didn't release anything. The fire department didn't, the police department didn't. We had to fight over all of it. I give those young people credit. Between 14 and 19, they fought for more than 20 years. And our first kids went over to the University of Minnesota to a school called Marshall U High. And the adults beat our kids with axe handles and bats and kicking and punching. And those that got away, some ran in the school, locked doors, and some ran all the way back over north to us. And we came back over and we literally rescued physically all of our children and brought them back to North Minneapolis. That was our first real problem where that nonviolent stuff wouldn't work. The second one was when King died. When King died, they felt that we wouldn't do nothing, that we no longer had a leader. And they would come over north on the top of the hill of Penn and Plymouth and punch that gas pedal and run down that hill and shoot at everybody black all the way down Plymouth. This war went on for 90 days. Not one TV station covered it, not one newspaper covered it. And the police cleared the area and let it happen. They literally shot at us for 90 days and we never got any help for 90 days. And we created what was called the Soul Patrol. We armed ourselves. We got our own scanners and our own radios, and we went out, got our CB radios in the car, and we went out and we defended our people and our community.
If you go to work, and if you show that you want to work, if you show that you're interested in having a job, I'll tell you now that there will be another 60 next week. We haven't got the commitment yet, but we'll have it. And after that, there'll still be another 60. And we'll make sure that we get everybody to work.
Was strictly, in my estimation and opinion, a complete case of looting and thievery and vandalism.
I think it slightly opened the eyes. I saw more activity and more movement on Plymouth Avenue today, prior to noon, than I have ever seen in the 11 years I've been here.
White folks in Minnesota, I think, maybe had a sense that blacks here were different, and the riots brought for them a real stark example of a revolutionary black mindset in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, that I don't know that people knew about in the way they came to know about it after that. And I think then the sort of gap or gulf between black and white really built off of that and has continued to this very day.
I think it's important though to know that there was what's called the Model Cities program, and Here again, like urban renewal and all those kind of programs, here they came. Well, we said, we're not having that. Already tore up our community with that freeway and stuff. Right. So they put a provision in there like citizens participation. Mm-hmm. This is important. Citizens participation. We took that to mean just that. That meant that every meeting they had, we was going to be up in those meetings. We're going to have these youth in these meetings with us. Right. And if necessary, we'll turn over the tables if we don't like what we're hearing. Mm-hmm. And we did that. We did that, including turn over the tables. Yeah. And at some point, I became the chairman. After a brilliant brother, Reverend Joe Pilot, was the chairman. And so the program went on and a lot of different things, which I won't get all the way into, but I did become the chairman there. And when they started talking about economic development and local development corporations and so forth, I again went to the so-called hardcore brothers who were successful drug dealers and whatever else, and said, look here, you guys got a lot of this business moxie. Why don't you get into something legitimate? There you go. And they said, well, Bobby, if you want to do it, I will, come on, I'm with you. And so we did that.
And becoming caught up in the black arts movement, which is like the cultural component of the civil rights and the black power movements, I got politicized. I mean, I got caught up in reading Marxist thought, Pan-African thought, black nationalism. I mean, and getting caught up in the rich mix of politics, music at that time, being a child of the 50s and 60s.
I think I would have to point to being a part of community. Mm-hmm. And the word Ubuntu, which simply means that I am because we are. Right. I'm a part of a community. And that community has certain ways of being, ways of expressing itself. It has a history. It has a combined sense of movement and excitation around its being. And I'm a part of all of that.
Keep on pushing. Keep on pushing. I've got to keep on pushing.
Well, it goes back to the family I was raised into. I mean, both my parents were people who taught us about the civil rights movement, human rights, respect, taught us about inclusion, and my mom in particular demonstrated generosity of spirit and believed that every person who was lucky enough to have something, anything, had a duty to share it. When I was a kid, if she was making a pot of gumbo or something, she never sent the neighborhood kids home.
One of the things that we had years ago also at the Oak Park Community Center was a CELI, which was a Saturday school where we came together to speak to educate, to reaffirm one another's blackness, and that's what we use to teach our children, because we can't wait on other folks to do it. Right. Because when you look at the school books, they might talk about Booker T, they might talk about Carver, and that's typically the extent of it. And then collectively they talk about us as slaves.
The culture is tricky, identity is tricky, especially when you're dealing with people who have suffered through 400 years of slavery, who had gotten out of slavery and that have dealt with significant disparities. We don't identify ourselves, other people identify ourselves. Race is illusion. And it's very difficult for the black person to function because African philosopher Frantz Fanon said, blackface, white mask. We have to go out. We have to worry about what the white man thinks about us when we're in his circles or in the area or downtown or shopping or whatever. And they don't have to worry about us.
There's just a lot of things that are passing through my mind when I think about the roles that African heritage people play in shaping what's called American culture.
I feel like sometimes our family embodies
the things that a lot of African Americans give lip service to. We talk a lot about our history and our culture and how rich it is. And I mean, almost anything that goes on, somebody says, well, you know, that first happened in Africa, and Africans did that, and Africans. But then, after you get past that, then you've got to actually live that. I mean, you've actually got to go out and pursue those things. And I feel like that's one of the things that we have done. And I don't know kind of what caused it, but it really is there. I feel like everybody's family can be like this.
Art is important because it's the only true way that we can tell our story and have it be true. There's no critique. It comes from one creative person to the masses of people.
Yeah, Penumbra was a beacon for me. I know that it was a light for me, and it allowed me to see that the light at the end of the tunnel wasn't an oncoming train, because I really saw a possibility for me through the theater. Theater and art doesn't, it can open and heal the wound at the same time, and it was able to heal some of the wounded spaces for myself. And Penumbra has always been the center of looking at African American culture and community through the lens of theater, and through the lens of so many dynamic playwrights and artists and performers. Most notably, of course, August Wilson, but people like Claude Purdy and Horace Bond and a host of other directors, Mary McClinton, and of course Lou Bellamy, the artistic director. But it's over the 35 years of its existence has had a cavalcade of remarkable art actors who perform there over the years, who we see in national and international work.
There's a lot of phenomenal artists out here. I mean, I'm an artist, and so I pay a lot of attention to both my own personal practice and those that are doing things that are similar to it, and also artists in general, artists of color out here. And I think that we have a really phenomenal community of artists out here, you know?
Well, you know, and then we try to do some kind of example, some kind of interactive thing, and say, well, you know, draw what you think is going on in African American history. You know, they said, well, give me some pictures. I'm like, no, let's go deeper than that. Just draw. What colors are there? What shelters, structures, you know, and they might do a little slavery. You know, and they'll have the worst looking person, you know, and then they'll rush up to hip hop. I'm like, dude, there's a whole lot of, well, I don't know what it is, you know.
History is part of culture, and culture is an asset to the community, to society. And culture is about this sort of entire set of how we as groups, as a set of people, perpetuate ourselves, right? Build our, I should say, maybe cement our value, be successful in the interactions with other people, deal with our world, and in a hopefully successful manner.
Say the time of the Civil Rights Movement, there would be no Civil Rights Movement without music. It could not have happened. And I would extend that to say there could be no black people without music. So there's a whole lot that's encoded into music. One, it's the channel through which spiritual life force moves, depending upon the rhythm and the melody and how people do that in community or in collaborations of various kinds.
He has, you know, he's a rock and roll Hall of Famer. You know, Prince has done some amazing things. He's a, you know, a brilliant musician, just genius when it comes to music and things like that. And just how he's created his own career. He's steered it the way he wanted to, and he didn't let Hollywood or anyone steer his career. I think that's brilliant, because I think a lot of struggles that artists have is someone overseeing or overlooking their own career and not having as much input in the way they want it to go.
Well, the history of Minnesota's black music scene is far vaster than what most individuals think of as starting with Prince. It actually began in the early 30s and 40s when jazz musicians played here in the Twin City area. A lot of artists came to the Twin City areas to perform, but there were a lot of artists here as well that set the stage for the new revolution, so to speak, that started in the 80s when I came aboard with artists like Prince and producers like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, groups like the Valdons and other jazz musicians who were around the Twin Cities, Jerry Hubbard and others who played the music and set the scene, so to speak, created a platform for the new generation of artists. When Prince came aboard, of course, he blew it up, took Minnesota in a whole different direction, giving it a sense, a purpose, a platform, a whole environment similar to the ones that we would see in Nashville and Chicago and Detroit even.
When I was really in it, it was the Mint Condition and you know, the other local groups that were really hot with Sounds of Blackness. Yeah. I was with them for 15 years. Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, awesome producers, great guys, great people. Just great memories. I've learned so much from them. But they put Minnesota on the map. All of them collectively put Minnesota on the map.
With the Oscar Pettifords, who were some of the preeminent jazz musicians in the country, that Duke Ellington and others would rely on in his early bands, or Roberta Davis, one of the great vocalists in jazz music, Sam Davis, who was one of the premier producers of gospel music.
It means the dance amongst us, it means the swag, it means the food, it means the clothing, it means all of that and a bag of chips. It means the value of education, it means looking out for one another, truly being our sisters and brothers' keeper, if you will, because no person is an island. It means really being proud of who I am, why I am, and how I look. Because every morning when I get up, starting with Good Morning America and before then, everything that comes at me is contrary to what I am. But I have to then put on the armor to be able to say, you know what, that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because as a former dancer, classically trained in ballet, inevitably folks would say, oh, yours is not the body for the dance. Mm-hmm. Or I'd be in the studio and they'd be saying, pull it in, and I'd say, it is in. I just got a little bit more back there than you have. Right. You know, but to be able to withstand that, and sometimes chuckle about it, but not to allow persons and systems to break you.
What is Black culture? It's about taking care of each other, you know, and sort of accepting. This is just my big dog way of speaking all the time, accepting each other as we are. And I know that I'm, you know, probably not the most extroverted or person that you see or out and about all the time, sure. But still, you know, accepting each other as we are and loving each other and ourselves. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it is, and it's not about hair. Yeah. You know, and skin tone and music. Yeah. It's just about being who we are and doing all we can to love ourselves and to help each other.
I came in the generation that began to take new names, African names, and we began to wear dashikis and afros and think and feel Afrocentric, right? And so while we were trying that on, discovering what it meant to be Black and to be African and not colored and not a Negro, sure. There was this transitional, struggle you had to go through because you were comfortable with the descriptions and the definitions of history that your parents worked with and worked through, that your grandparents worked with and worked through, but now it was your turn to create this definition of who you are and where you're going. And then we decided as a people that we would not be colored people, we'd be African Americans, we would be Black people, we would be Africans. I called myself early on an African in the New World, a New World African.
This was back in the great pot, chicken wing, front stoop hanging, midnight ramble roller skating days. When 8 tracks hollered, moving on up, keep on pushing, and people get ready. There's a train a-comin'. By Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions.
There are other great things as well. people like Setu Jones, doing great things in the art world. Of course, August Wilson, towering figure in the letters in the United States, did it from St. Paul, African-American man from Pittsburgh. Like so many of us, came here and made a great mark. Gordon Parks, the noted filmmaker, photographer, writer, everything else, did it here. And then, of course, Roy Wilkins, who was a leader in the NAACP, did so much for this country, did it from right here in Minnesota. So the bottom line is, Minnesotans are cracking glass ceilings all the time. It's a great place for that. And even as we talk about certain white leaders who cracked ceilings, like, say, Hubert H. Humphrey, he was informed by people like Cecil Newman and people like Nellie Stone Johnson. Minnesotans know about Nellie Stone Johnson and Cecil Newman, but the world may not know their names. But the world does know Hubert H. Humphrey's name, and Hubert H. Humphrey, if he was here, could tell you these two individuals helped inform and shape his understanding of the importance of civil rights in America.
People don't know that there is no DFL party without Nellie Stone Johnson. From that humble beginnings, being elected to the library board in 1945, we have a great political will that created not only Sharon Sells Belton, but Congressman Keith Ellison and all of the other elected officials that we have that represent the Democratic Party, and not only take the great resources that is Minnesota's democratic, liberal environment and apply it to the rest of the world.
We are a very tight-knit community. We celebrate everything from the birth of a baby to the naming ceremonies. We do weddings, and if somebody has a celebration, everybody goes there to celebrate. When somebody dies, everybody goes there to mourn. So we are a very tight-knit community here.
What I see is just like the openness and just have open conversations and open communications. Because if you like African Americans stop on how they came here, we're never gonna go anywhere.
Right.
When we come, we don't have any view about what the certain minds are set. We don't know. The only thing we know that when we came here, we're finding our brothers and sisters.
Right.
And every time I can tell you, I look at somebody, I just want to jump on that person because he look like exactly my cousin or somebody that I know.
I think it's always a good thing when you bring people in the room together, just for us to talk. I feel like a lot of times we dance around each other too much. We don't get to talk a lot, and we are all thinking our thoughts, and so it might be setting the bar very low, but I just want us to come in the room, discuss some things, but not just sort of in a venting way. A lot of the time when we do come together, I feel like we are all venting. We all feel so strongly about how we feel that we're not allowing others to influence us a little bit and change us. So I would like a summit like this to really bring us in the room and let us listen to each other, and not trying to, I know Tanea has a well-planned summit, but maybe if I can put my little 2 cents in there, I wish I was in town to be at it. Just have maybe each participant, after all of this, just promise what tangible thing you're going to do to reach across to the other community. How are we going to connect after this? Because a lot of the time when we talk, we leave, then we go back to our different corners. Nothing gets done until the next summit. Then we're talking about the same problems again.
And the challenge is that popular culture and white media will attempt to say there is conflict between newly arrived Africans and those of us who are part of the legacy African American community. We have to resist that divisive maneuver and reject it out of hand and say to each other that we welcome each other. We know we are the same people, same family, right? And so what we have to recognize is the tremendous and awesome opportunity to build community with other African people who are here like us.
Well, you know, the United States is kind of fondly known as the land flowing with milk and honey. And people think that, you know, when you come here, it is there. You know, manna falls from heaven all the time. Right. But of course, when you get here, you know that you have to really not only work very hard, but you have to find your niche in community, in the society. And as a result of which, you know, a lot of people are either discouraged but very few go back home, because whatever be the case, whether they're suffering here or not, you know, they perceive that it's better than going back home. Yeah. Another reason is that the United States offer educational opportunities that are unrivaled.
I used to do this thing called celebrating our similarities and differences, and I changed it to value our similarities and differences. Yeah. You don't always have to celebrate, but you got to respect. Absolutely. You know, because that's what you're asking for. That's what we're asking for in our own self. In this, you know, this gathering, you know, it's like, you know, we want to see how we can get along. Well, first thing we need to know about each other.
For me, whereas I have this special love for my community, where I have a special love for African people, for people that are coming out of the diaspora, that I also think that there's some need to start to connect where our struggles are intersecting.
I know that there's an organization that used to, AAAL, I believe, organize trips to Ghana. And some people were like, oh, we can't believe it. This is not what we felt or thought about Africa. Right. We thought like people who are swinging from tree to tree and living among animals and those kinds of things. They didn't know that we have the modern amenities that, you know, we have here. Maybe to a smaller scale, but it's getting up there. Right. And also the people, the hospitality is really what you take with you. Because as you said, people really welcome you. They want you to be more comfortable than they are. Yeah. And that's the culture.
I speak Wolof, is my native language, French. I speak English. I speak a little bit German, and I speak some Arabic, some.
You know, I would like to maybe at this point involve my son. Oh, yeah. I think he has an interesting background himself. His father is West African, and he's originally from Guinea. And so, you know, it's as the generations go on, his upbringing is different from mine, because I wasn't raised in central Minnesota. I was raised right here in the Twin Cities, and as I mentioned, my family being from, you know, Kansas City, and he's that next generation of mixture and diversity, and so I don't know if he wants to say a couple of words.
I did find the Guinea, West Africa Guinea flag. I think it was red, yellow, green, and then a black star in the middle, and then I put that down. I put my whole family's black, and then for one thing, I didn't really go with it. My first idea was it said something I'm proud of. I was about to put I'm a black Minnesotan, but I put that down, and then I put down something else that I forgot.
Our organization, we invited the council to have a meeting at our place, and that was one of the suggestions that came out, that we have a summit, something like that, and I'm glad that it was, you know, it was followed through, and here's the result of it. Now we're having a summit. And the reason why that came up, because we realized there was a lot of conflict, especially between black Minnesotans, Africans, African American, and defining different roles and accepting, you know, different roles, and not understanding cultural background, impact, and all of that. So I think the summit is very, very much on target in terms of identifying and addressing those issues, so that we can move forward as one group of people rather than separate.
I left my country, Liberia, in 1985. I went to the Soviet Union, where I went to school, and then I went to the United Kingdom, where I also went to school at the University of London. I came to the US in 1998, and I have been here since.
Growing up, I've had two types of blackness. I've had the West African side from my dad, and the African American or the North American side from my mother. So growing up, when I hear the term African American, you know, being younger, I automatically assumed that it was Black American, meaning born in North America and having Black North American roots.
The DNA mapping is important because that's a really strong, tangible way that you can link people together. And, you know, since there is this divide between the communities, you can show, you know, we're really one big family. You know, we're cousins. You know, we need to work as family. We need to, you know, move this community forward together. We're not a separate people.
There's this germane historical connection which inarguably stands out so strongly that Liberia was founded predominantly by free slaves after the American Colonization Society decided to have blacks who were free that wanted to be in the motherland repatriated. And when the free slaves went to Africa, they tried to find a land, and they first settled on Chevreau Island in Sierra Leone, but that was highly infested with mosquitoes and diseases. And then finally they made arrangements with the chiefs in Liberia, known as the Grain Coast at the time, and they sold them a parcel of land called the Providence Island, and from there they started expanding. And so the free slaves took away their way of life they have known from the plantations in America and sort of transplanted those ideas back in Africa, in Liberia specifically. It's so important to the extent that even Monrovia, which is the capital of Liberia, was named after President James Monroe. Most of the streets, the towns like Pittsburgh, White Plains, New Georgia, Mississippi, in Africa, all those names are all in Liberia. So directly, free slaves who left this country went back to Africa in a bid to, you know, regain their freedom and help spread civilization, which of course was the core objective of the ACS.
There are some beats that are traditional, but I've been doing African drum for so long, and I'm now I'm a little bit influenced by the hip hop, pop music. I write some nice stuff that people, because if you teach kids from African who live in America, you need to bring some modern. I still play traditional, but I do a lot of creativity.
But before me, there have been other students after the Second World War who studied at the University of Minnesota, who became influential people in Ethiopia. And of course, there were people who came here in 1902. These are I showed you these are people from southern Ethiopia, the Oromo people, they're called the Borans. See, these are the people who came in 1902.
And in Senegal, we are known as the land of Teranga. Teranga is the way to welcome people, to care for people. It's a little bit between like Indians and the first, you know? So it's what brought us this.
Well, the Ethiopian community is a new immigrant group within the past 20 years. There are a lot of problems like any other community: finance, housing, education. We are part of this problem. So guidance, how to live, to manage to live here, and all those things. So I expect, like, if there is any housing legislation, that's very important, because when people come here, it's very difficult to afford to live a better life. Education is very important. Like immigrants, they get more opportunity to go to school, and then some legislation which facilitates that, which supports that things. And then as an immigrant, we need, you know, we came here, we have to learn. If you take my own case, even if I came from college, and then it is very difficult to manage here first when I start here. So if there is any additional additional support which help people to manage to live here, that's also something which I always think that our community is not get well oriented what they have to do to stand by their feet.
Everybody has a story, and it's in our stories, I believe, I think it's within our stories, everybody has a story, that we really find human connection.
Right.
Right,
You know, we all know what pain is. We all know your pain may not be the cause of that pain might differ, but we know what pain is. We know what love is. We know what hope is. We know what spirit is. We all have those similarities, and they come in ways, but when we listen to each other's stories, we're more connected.
Really what we want to do here, the really purpose of this summit is to help bring the African and African American communities together. Last year, the Legacy Committee, we conducted a legacy listening tour around the state of Minnesota, where we went to 5 different cities, to Minneapolis, St. Cloud, Duluth, Rochester, Faribault, and we heard from community members about the issues that are impacting their lives in those cities. And one of the things that we came up against that had actually impacted the council and myself personally was, there was some tension between the African and African American communities. And we actually had a meeting of African elders with board members, the executive committee actually of the council in August. And as we were discussing some of the issues that were going on, kind of an idea of a summit, of bringing people together to kind of talk about these issues and to get to know one another actually came out of that.
What is the next big idea or ideas for African descent arts community?
I am the executive director and one of the co-founders of Juxtaposition Arts. We're located over in North Minneapolis, a youth-focused visual art and design education program, gallery, community development corporation. I was born in Kansas City, Kansas. My family moved to North Minneapolis when I was 13 years old. Today I live in St. Paul. My heart and my community is in North Minneapolis.
Right now I'm very full just from your request. I thought we were here to talk, but this is a whole other challenge. We need to reorganize. We need to start talking about why do I need to speak right now? There's a bigger challenge. I'm not that important, but I'm going to do my job in this moment and say my name is Leah Nelson. My name is Leah Nelson. Nelson is my grandfather's name. He was given by the chauffeur service he worked for in South Africa. His name is Kafumbuti. My name is Leah Nelson Kafumbuti. Yes. I'll just take it, but on my papers it's Leah Nelson. So I grew up in Zimbabwe. I've always introduced myself as a colonized African. Now I will say I'm a recovering colonized African because I've been here almost 20 years. I came here because I was fellowshipped by the Rockefellers to bring me to a competition. Then I got a full scholarship to go to a college to get my degree in modern dance. Why modern dance, my family asked me. Why not a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or something useful? But the same job I was doing at 15 years old in Zimbabwe, returning our culture back to our people because we had gone through many years of colonization up until 1980.
In 2009, I started a publishing company called Free Poets Press, with the intention that I would be creating a space for Black and brown writers to be able to own our own work and our own images, because we're so often historically unable to, and that was really kind of out of the tradition of the third world presses and the broadside presses, and kind of understanding like the in the Black arts movement. And so that was kind of where I was coming from there. From here, I was born in St. Paul, resident of North Minneapolis with my family. And as far as what's on my mind, oh man, there's so much on my mind in regards to the arts. It's very difficult, especially when you're coming into this and you're such a, like I'm a young Black artist, like very, very young in the midst of this thing. And so like I come in from that perspective,
I would like very much for us not to trap ourselves in the necessity to define art. I suggest that we think about the creative processes. I suggest that we think about creative thinking. I suggest that all of us have within us the ability to think creatively, and the outcome may not be a movement, a painting, a photograph, a sketch, or anything. It might be a problem solved in the community.
We are here today to experience something so powerful, something that took us from one place and is now bringing us into a new time and dimension. I would like everyone to close your eyes for just a moment. I want you to picture this land without buildings, picture these streets without cars. I want you to place yourself back in the 1800s. I want you to think of horses on the land. I want you to think about broken down shacks. I want you to think about another man owning another man. Throughout my years, I've seen many a man wrangled and treated like cattle. Throughout my years, I've seen many a woman raped, heard many a cry. He said, you're some singing people. You're storytelling people. There's power in your music. He said, send a warning in the music. Not only do you send a warning in the music, but you send instruction in the music.
To go beyond this transatlantic experience, which is very important, very central, but we should not focus on it to the exclusion of these other places. So when we open up the topic like that, and then we start talking about the Black experience, we can enrich the conversation. And people were scattered within Africa itself, from one place to another, within Africa. Migration and war and other things did scatter a lot of people.
Because what we're tied to is what E. Franklin Fraser, the sociologist, called the pejorative tradition in interpreting our history and ourselves. Pejorative is not an everyday word. It's P-E-G-O-R-A-T-I-V-E. And it means when you look and you reflect, you always reflect on the weaker side, the darker side, the unsuccessful side. That's it. And he said, we've pretty much been trained by the system of white supremacy to think of ourselves this way. Nothing good. I'm glad the previous speaker, Ms. Moreno, mentioned that among these nameless, faceless people who were enslaved were kings. That's no joke. Although I think too many of us get carried away with that and say, well, all were kings and queens. We weren't. We were just like the people in Europe. People who got on the Mayflower weren't making it in Europe. So let's be, but there were, and there's lots of evidence of there was African royalty in this country. And somebody in this audience may be descendant of African royalty.
Hi, my name is Samira. I'm 15, and I'm looking to broaden my understanding today.
That's my granddaughter.
Good afternoon, my name is Jewel. I am a high school teacher, history teacher in St. Paul, and I am 40 years old.
I'm Janata, and I'm an artist. I do writing, and I'm an aerial artist, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm so grateful to be in this space and to be invited to be in this space. And I hope to share and learn as much as I can. Thank you. Oh, and I'm 32, almost.
Hotel, my name is Sehat Taksiaka. I am a mother of 4. This is my 16-year-old daughter. I am a yoga instructor, and I'm very honored to be here, seeing all these beautiful African faces.
Hi, my name is Urudi CSR. I'm 20 years old. I go to Howard University, and I was raised by this community.
I'm Ishmar Perhotep. I am 12 years old. I'm homeschooled and looking forward to having fun with my sister this summer.
Hello, my name is Burhan, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I brought a couple of my young black brothers and sisters. We're from the Bronco Community Center, which came here
But what I want to know is, how can I pass on to them the fire and the energy that runs in my veins? How can I pass on to them the fact that our soul, the soul of the African, cannot be changed, no matter what anyone else does? You know what I mean? So that's the kind of thing we want to talk about today.
When I first came to America, it was very difficult for me to be an African. And I was staying a pro in the African American community. There was so much taboo between the African I'm from, African I am, and the Africans that have been here before me. So it was a harder time for me to get readjusted, and in a way, subconsciously, I almost wanted to be non-African descent. I wanted to be an African that was living here. I wanted to speak like them, talk like them, act like them. But I come to realize we were both being brainwashed by a higher, if you look deep into the root cause of what made us that person. And I see that in my community right now. I see that in the younger children. But we all have to just go back to that root and, embrace our Africanism.
And they called it Africa. Now, in order to take care of this wonderful place, they chose, the sun and the earth chose Uhuru, the Prince of Freedom. And Uhuru, being strong, courageous, and wise, did an excellent job of taking care of this wonderful, beautiful place.
Join us in recognizing our history and culture celebrating the present and shaping our future in this first Power of Unity Summit. We will continue as the director of the council to bring these convenings around major issues that are affecting our quality of life over the next 3 or 4 years. It is our hope that you leave at the end of these 3 days with new friendships for life, a greater understanding of our commonalities, a greater appreciation of our contributions to Minnesota and the world, a greater commitment to harmony, a greater commitment to unifying our community to overcome our challenges.